So Richard has been a councillor for Darling Ward in London Borough of Bromley in the early 70s. The ward was 15 square miles of Greenbelt, and he spent much of his time as the only ward councillor fighting to protect the Greenbelt. He has been chair of CPR Kent, the largest branch in England, for 5 years, and also chair of the South East region for 6 years. He is now chair of the London Greenbelt Council, an organisation representing over 100 organisations in the London Greenbelt. He has spoken at many meetings of member organisations, helping them to organise campaigns. Would you please welcome Richard Knox-Johnston? Thank you.
Well, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Wonderful, big audience here tonight. It's amazing how these meetings attract audiences. The biggest one we ever had was 600, which included social network as well, went out to it. And there is absolutely no doubt that when authorities like the local council see how much interest there is, it does have an effect. Now, I'm going to detail various things tonight, but the first thing I want to do is to thank NEDRA for inviting me here tonight, and obviously the opportunity of talking to you, and also thank you very much indeed for coming to this evening's meeting. And I can see that there aren't enough seats, and I'm sorry about that, but hopefully it'll be exciting enough to keep you on your toes. Also, you'll notice on your seats a NEDRA, I want to be a member. Now, I was asked to point this out to you. How many people in this room are already members of NEDRA? Fantastic. So about half, so there's an opportunity for 50% of you to join up at the end of the meeting, and there's a pen on your seat and this form, and I will tell you now that when you go to a public inquiry, which you'll have to at some stage on the Regulation 19 when the local plan goes before the inspector, for somebody to be able to represent you at that meeting and say, we have 600, 800, or whatever it is, the members, is very effective. And it's very important, and inspectors do take note. So I would urge you all, please, to join this organisation so that you can help with what they're doing. You saw I was the councillor for Darwin Ward in the London Borough of Bromley. There were 3 villages, Down, Cudham, you had to pronounce it that way, otherwise you got into trouble, and nobody else can say this, but I was the councillor for Pratt's Bottom. Now, I'm going to cover tonight, if I may, a series of aspects which hopefully will give you some idea about the things you can do in order to stop the intrusion of the Greenbelt. Can I say that there are other organisations that I've spoken to over the last 3 or 4 years who've actually taken it forward and who have made changes. And so there is an opportunity for you to do something. And I want you to know now that there's no point in being over pessimistic. There are things you can do. Now I'm going to ask, please, are there any Sevenoaks district councillors here tonight? One there, and one here. Good. Fine. Well, first of all, welcome. It's nice to see you at these meetings. Because I can assure you at some of the meetings the councillors don't want to attend, and it's a great shame because they're the main audience for what I'm about to speak to you about this evening. And thank you for saying that, because I was just about to ask, and how many town councillors are there? 2 of you, right. Oh, sorry, I beg your pardon. Well, nice to see you as well. Okay, the first thing I'm going to do is to introduction, which we've done, and then take you through the London Greenbelt Council, tell you a little bit about that, the organisation that we are. I'm then going to briefly brief you on the local plan process. I know some of you are experts on it, and I'm sorry if I'm repeating things, but I do think it's important everybody understands what the process is and how it works. Then we're going to influencing your local plan. and I'll then go through that. And then the new government signals changes, and I finished my slides after the King's speech, so I'm well up to date with what we think might well be happening. And then there's an opportunity for questions, and please do, if you want to ask a question. Planning is not the easiest topic, as you can imagine, and the more you know about it and the more you're able to contribute, the better. So the London Greenbelt Council. Well, it's 110 organisations that we've got in the London Greenbelt Council now, and it's in the London Metropolitan Greenbelt. That's what we're responsible for, and I'll show you a map shortly about the extent of the London Metropolitan Greenbelt. There's some people outside looking through the window. Is it possible that they can come in, because they can't see the slides? Do come round and come in so you can. Oh, all right, fine. We were formed to protect the London Metropolitan Greenbelt, and we've produced several papers over the years, starting in 2016, Safe Under Us. That was the comment made by the original Secretary of State for Planning when the Conservatives came in. He said the Greenbelt is safe under us. So we called the documents that. We've also published a document, The Accelerating Loss of London's Greenbelt. We formed an all-party parliamentary group with MPs of all types and descriptions, which we have to have for an all-party parliamentary group. And we published a report in 2019, A Positive Vision for London's Greenbelt. And that's very important, because as time has gone on, the Greenbelt has taken over a lot more areas of importance than it had originally. We've got a website, and we do hold seminars like this and other things in doing. So that's the organisation. Of the members that we have a membership fee of only £25. So you'll understand that we haven't got an awful lot of money. So we are running on a shoestring, but it's amazing how much we can achieve. In 2016, the purple dots there were the developments that were forecast in local plans, or which had already received planning permission, or which had already been built. 4 years later, in 2020, that's what it looked like. And now to the local plan process. Well, first of all, there's Regulation 18, and you've been through that. And that's basically, as I say, evidence gathering. That's what it's there for. And that should end up with a consultation on what it's there. But it's mostly looking at sites and seeing what sites are available. Regulation 19, which is where we're at the present moment here, is the pre-submission stage. And this is a draft consultation document which has to be sent out for consultation. Now, that consultation has got strict rules, and if the council don't abide by those rules, it can be challenged, and some have been challenged in the High Court because they didn't do it properly. So it's very important that that consultation takes place properly. There's enough time given for people to contribute and get feedback from it. There's an opportunity for making changes to that Regulation 19. Now, not a lot of councillors know this, but there is an opportunity to change it as a result of the feedback. And if the changes are sufficiently large, then there's an opportunity for the council to go back for further consultation. And then obviously the document can be published. So that's where we are at the moment. So is there any chance of changing what's in Regulation 19? The answer is yes. And secondly, get your situation organised so that you're able to challenge it if you want to. Regulation 22 is the submission of the draft local plan to the Secretary of State and to the independent inspector. And the final draft documents, as I say, go to the government at that stage. An independent inspector or inspectors are appointed, and they will then set out how they're going to run it. But and they have to look at the evidence, the sustainability, and the soundness of the plan. And then Regulation 24, the inspector's report and recommendation. Excuse me. Recommendation, note, it's a recommendation to the council which under the MPPF the council doesn't have to accept if it doesn't want to. It doesn't tell the council they've got to do it, it's a recommendation from the inspector. The council would obviously have to have very good grounds for not accepting it, but there is the possibility that they can do so. Influencing your local plan. Well, the first thing is housing numbers. And last December, Michael Gove, who was then the Secretary of State, said that there was now an advisory starting point. There actually had always been an advisory starting point. He was just making sure everybody understood that. So that means the standard method, with SM has got it there, standard method is the method of calculating what you need in this area in the way of housing. That is based on a calculation done by the Office of National Statistics in 2014. There's been further reports from the Office of National Statistics in 2016, 2018, and there's now been the census. All those, generally, in the southeast of England, have shown less housing need than the 2014 ones. But the government held a consultation. We, amongst others, put in a report saying we should change that 2014 figure. And they said, well, we've listened to what you've said and we're not going to change it. So that's where we are. So it's a 2014 figure. So the first thing is that 2014 figure realistic to this area? And if it's not, then the council, led by the councillors, should be asking for it to be reviewed and say, right, sorry, we think you've got that wrong. Other national policies apply, and that means things like designated areas, areas of outstanding natural beauty, and greenbelt, and things like that. So if there is a lot within an area, and I think Sevenoaks is 93% or something like that, then that should affect the housing figures that are going to be produced. And that can be taken into account. And again, it's up to the council to put forward a case as to why they are unable to reach those housing figures based on those designated areas. Then we talk about the specific circumstances of a challenge. Well, this was a situation in 2014 which the Office of National Statistics admitted they got wrong in Coventry, because they included in their figures all the students that were only there during term time. And they agreed they got it wrong. And occasionally there are things like that that need to be looked at, especially with the student population, which is not there all the time. Paras 35 and 61 of the National Planning Policy Framework have to be taken. They really, in some ways, contradict each other's. But the important thing is that the National Planning Policy Framework has to be taken as a whole. And judges have made this clear in the cases that have gone to the High Court. Some say Para 35 insists on the standard method, and you will get barristers turning up to local inquiries and to also local plan inquiries saying, oh yes, that's the standard method, that's a minimum. It nowhere says that at all in the MPPF, and it needs to be challenged. And paragraph 11 says quite clearly that you should take account of designated areas. So if you like, there are two paragraphs there saying be careful of designated areas, and one saying you should try and hit the target. And again in December, Michael Gove made the point at that launch that housing numbers alone are not a reason for building in the Greenbelt. And he made that absolutely clear. So if you can't meet your housing numbers, then you can't say you can build in the Greenbelt, and that's the reason why you have to do it. So now we talk about exceptional circumstances. Now the only people who can make a decision as whether something is exceptional circumstances are the local councillors. They decide whether there are exceptional circumstances for building in the Greenbelt. And it says there, all other avenues have got to be considered beforehand. So if the councillors haven't considered every single aspect, then they should not be saying that building needs to take place in the Greenbelt. And this includes densities. So in other words, if new housing within the district is taking place, and it's taking place at very low densities, and some of them are, believe it or not, at 14 homes per hectare of 5-bedroom homes and that sort of thing. And in London now, they're looking at over 100 homes per hectare in densities. And that doesn't mean that they don't look nice, they do. Actually, there's one or two really very nice developments there. And the harm that could be done in meeting the housing figures, that has to be considered. And whether that harm is greater than the harm to the Greenbelt. That's the thing which is important. And I said, only councillors can decide on exceptional circumstances. They're the only people who have the right to do so. And this cannot be challenged by the inspector. And this is where we come to the Guildford case, High Court case in 2019, where Sir Duncan Ouseley said that. I'll let you read that. So the planning judgment in the case of exceptional circumstances and whether to build in the Greenbelt is the local councillors. They have that planning judgment, and the law supports them in making that decision. Para 145 of the National Planning Policy Framework, I'm awfully sorry about this, but people like me, we lead a weird life reading this thing. And it places the onus on councils and councillors to justify evidence, exceptional circumstances for using the Greenbelt. And it says there. And this is supported in paragraph 146. And then it says, Greenbelt cannot be used unless avenues have been exhausted. And even then, it does not mean that they have to release Greenbelt. So in other words, all the things have got to be looked at. Every other alternative has got to be taken into account. And even then, that's not a reason to build in the Greenbelt. And they still have to consider whether any adverse impacts of doing so would significantly and demonstrably outweigh the benefits. And that, again, is in the National Planning Policy Framework. And it goes back, now I emphasize a matter of judgment. Para 146 makes as much use as possible of brownfield land. Optimizes density of development and in discussion with adjoining local planning authorities. Now, if I just deal with brownfield just a moment, CPRE London, together with two organisations in the London Greenbelt Council, joined up together in the London Borough of Enfield to have a look and see what brownfield land there was. The London Borough of Enfield said they had enough brownfield land for 2,700 homes. That figure wasn't up to date, and it wasn't properly analysed, I can tell you that now. The interesting thing is that the three organisations got together, they did a Google map analysis of the area, they found all the black and the grey areas, and then they went out with millboards and pens and looked at all these areas to see what they were. And they discovered, when they looked at that with the proper densities, there was enough land in Enfield for nearly 20,000 houses. And what I've been trying to do year after year is persuade politicians of all shapes and descriptions that this brownfield land is available. Now, at the moment, they're looking at nearly 1 million homes could be built on brownfield land. But I think it's nearly twice that amount. And I think, you know, we should think very carefully before we start building over our countryside and our green belt when all this land is available. Why is it available? Well, developers don't like doing it because it's not nearly as profitable as building on greenfield sites. Now, the government has got to take action to enforce that brownfield takes place. Now, the big problem here is that if they're to persuade developers to build on brownfield land, then there is absolutely no point whatsoever in giving them developers the alternative of building on greenbelt land. So when you say brownfield first policy, That should mean brownfield first. And until all that's used up, then we don't build on the greenbelt and we don't build on the countryside. Another thing, and you've done it here in Sevenoaks, is you did a greenbelt review. Michael Gove said, "It is clear that there is generally no requirement on local authorities to review or alter greenbelt boundaries if it would be the only way to meet housing need." I reckon Sevenoaks spent £40,000 on employing Arup to do their review. And Arup's method was to say, well, there's good, poor, and indifferent. There isn't. It's green belt. That's all that counts. Not whether it's poor performing, medium performing, anything. There is nowhere in any law which says poor performing green belt. There might be as a result of the general election, but we'll have to deal with that one when we come to it. But they spent £40,000 doing that exercise. And there was never any requirement to do so. And there are two things that, first of all, the cost to you as ratepayers for something which wasn't necessary. And also, who do you think reads those? Developers. And they look, Sevenoaks has signified this as a poor area, we'll shove in an application on that. And that's what they do. And they say, oh, well, you had it in your report saying it was poor performing, so we want to build on it. And the councils who've done this are all open to that sort of development challenge. So, local councillors, they're the people who count. They're the people you have to persuade. They're the people you have to influence. They make these important greenbelt decisions. They make the housing calculation. They decide whether greenbelt is required and why, and whether a greenbelt review is required or not, and whether there are special circumstances, and whether they've been through all the processes to make sure that they need greenbelt in the first place. And they cannot be dictated to by inspectors. If the council, in its wisdom, decided to put forward no greenbelt land whatsoever to the inspector does not have the right to enforce them to do so. There is nothing in any legislation which says that. And that, we go back to the judgment of Guildford in 2019, where it was made clear the inspector cannot force a local council to produce greenbelt, and it can't also influence the council's special circumstances. It's a matter of judgment, and the judgment lies with your local councillors. So, what can you do? Well, the first thing is to lobby councillors, and here I say I'm very grateful there's 3 of them here tonight. That's really good, and I hope you've picked up some of these points, because to be fair to you, a lot of what you're being told by your officers is incorrect. And you should challenge your officers. After all, we don't elect the planning officers, we elect councillors. And they're the people who we should hold accountable for this. Lobby your Member of Parliament and get them involved in it. And do tell Tom and I do actually know each other, do tell Tom I'm happy to brief him at any time he likes. Form a Stromwell organisation. You're doing that tonight. Join this organisation, build it up. This works. I can tell you it really does work. Seek help and advice from those who've succeeded, and I'll come into a minute to show you some successes. Social networking. It's not something my generation knows very much about, but social networking does work, and it gets young people involved, and it gets them enthusiastic about trying to save the greenbelt. And, you know, if you talk to young people and they say, but you're NIMBYs, you're stopping me buying a house, etc., etc., the answer to that is, no, we're not. Because if you build in the brownfield land, that's the sort of housing, A, that young people seem to want because they like living in an urban area. Equally, it's probably cheaper and costs them less to buy it and to rent. And thirdly, the infrastructure's already there. So you don't have to build the infrastructure, which you do on a greenfield site. And as we all know, what's been happening over the last 5, 10 years is houses have been going up, but the infrastructure isn't there. And we have the usual thing, no school, no surgery, shops a long way away, and so on and so forth. Media, get the press, radio and TV involved. And you can do this by perhaps getting councillors along to a meeting where you discuss with them the challenges that are there, or the MP, and invite the local TV to come. I know 2 or 3 that have done that, and it's very, very effective because it makes councillors listen, and it's very important. Hold further public meetings. Build this up. Don't let it go. Have another meeting. Get something moving, and again, invite local councillors to come. Fundraise. At some stage, you may want to take out a judicial review. That is after Regulation 19 has been passed by the local council, and you believe there is something illegal in what they have done. It could be they haven't done consultation properly. It could be that they've done something illegal in preparing that plan. You therefore may want to go to a judicial review. Now, you will be told, mostly by planning officers, that a judicial review will cost you £80,000. Not so. The first part of a judicial review is a pre-action protocol letter, which is sent to the council, challenging them on the legal grounds that you're looking at. The council has to answer that letter and say why they don't think it's correct. That will cost you 500 quid, that's all. And that sets you up, because immediately your legal team can see what the council is saying in defending the actions it's taken, and they will then come back to you and say, we think you've got 2 areas here you can take further to a judicial review. And then you can decide whether you want to do that and take it forward. And campaign, like mad. Campaign, get people involved, get people working with you and taking the actions that you want. Successes, just down the road, Tudley, Capel, all right, in Tunbridge Wells. They had a meeting like this. They invited me along. I was quite surprised, actually, because there were 400 people there. And they got their campaign going. And they started to lobby their local councillors. And as you know, Tudley have now got people who represent the Tudley organisation, like this one, on the local council. And they managed to get village, country village that was going to be built at Tudley, it's gone. The inspector at the inquiry chucked it out, and it's gone, and they've saved their place. So that's a success. The London Borough of Redbridge, and would you believe, on this one, I was working with Wes Streeting, who was the MP for it. And it was a sports field where Nasser Hussain had started playing cricket, Jimmy Creeves had started playing football. They had umpteen international sportsmen, and the council owned the land and they wanted to sell it for housing. And Wes Streeting was very much against it, and we managed to knock that one out. But I keep reminding Wes Streeting that was Greenbelt. Broke Hill in Knockholt, another one by Knockholt Station, the golf course there. The developers threw everything at that one. The best barrister, the best professor at UCL, they threw everything, and they didn't get it, and it was chucked out. Edenbridge, Esher Racecourse. Now, that was a campaign because Esher Racecourse wanted to do up the course, make it better than it was, refurbish it, etc. But they needed 250 houses in the Greenbelt to subsidise it. The local organisation at Edenbridge not only stopped that, got it stopped, but there are now, I think, about half a dozen members of that organisation on the local council. Gravesham, sacrificing Greenbelt in their local plan. Again, another meeting in a local church of 400 people. The vicar got up to greet us to start with, and I thought, gosh, we're going to get a sermon. And he said, wonderful to see the church full. And he said, can I remind you that we're open every Sunday? And so it was good on him, well done him. And on Gravesham, we had a public meeting. The leader of the council came along and addressed them. He hadn't been properly briefed, and he was sacked as the leader of the council as a result of that. And we managed to save the Greenbelt in Gravesham. Three Rivers, same thing. That's in Hertfordshire. Organisation like this started off, joined up with the other residents' association. Again, the leader of the council was sacked by the councillors. And now Three Rivers local plan has got little or no Greenbelt in it. It had a great deal in it. So it just shows you, that's a Liberal Democrat controlled council who were going to build all over the Greenbelt originally. Bracknell. It's another campaign we got involved in. Again, very much working hand in glove with CPRE. But Bracknell had got a local plan where there were all the housing numbers, the standard method was right, everything was fine. But suddenly they were approached by this Chinese agricultural research company who said, we want to refurbish our site and build all this, that and the other, and we need to build 4,000 homes in the Greenbelt to pay for it. The campaigners managed to get that reduced to 2,000, and then when it went to the examination in public, Regulation 19, the inspectors threw it out. So they saved their Greenbelt. But again, once again, the local councillors lost heavily at the next local election because they had been pushing that forward as an idea. And don't forget the Tandridge effect. Just across the border in Surrey, Tandridge in about, I think it was 2016, I think it was then, an ex-Olympic gymnast stood against the leader of the council and got twice as many votes. And she was the Residents' Association. The following year, because they have elections every year, they got the next leader. Now they have 19 councillors. The Residents' Association has 19 and there are 3 independents. So 22 out of the 40 councillors are independent or Residents' Association. And the leader of the council is an independent. And she's taken over. And she was originally a trustee of CPRE Surrey. So that's the Tandridge effect. And that can happen where councils don't listen to people, because people take the law into their own hands and put up their own candidates. And it does work. And so those are the successes. So you can see there is a good reason for campaigning and doing what you're doing. At the moment, we're watching 3 particular local plans going through the process. Solihull, which is obviously alongside Birmingham, where they have a large chunk of Greenbelt in their boundary. And they were already going through Regulation 19, and after the announcement in December last year, the inspector wrote and said, it's no good trying to put forward further points for changing it because I'm not going to listen to them anyway. That was unfortunate, because the council wrote back another letter to him saying, well, that's fine, but if you take that action, what we will do is withdraw our local plan and start again under the new rules. We'll see how that one gets on. It's still going there. Spelthorne, on the other side of the Greenbelt in Surrey, they had their Regulation 19 under the original council, and they were going to use quite large areas of Greenbelt. Then they had local elections, and the ruling party lost out very badly. And now they're made up of independents, Liberals and Greens, and the first thing the new leader did was to say to the inspector, we've got a whole load of new councillors who haven't done planning before. We want 3 months off to train them. And the inspector had to agree that. And I will see what happened at Spelthorne. We'll see how that goes. Edenbridge next door to them, which was where Esher racetrack, where the racecourse was. Edenbridge next door to them, again, is Liberal Democrats, Independents and Greens. And they have put forward a proper local plan. And I urge anybody who's interested in local plans, go to their website and look at it. It's a local plan. It's not a housing plan, it's a local plan. And it's got everything in there, including things like carbon sequestration, sewage and all the rest of it, things like that. It's a proper local plan and the future of the local plan and the people who live there. I put this up because they are suspected changes at the moment. We don't know what they're going to be. There's a big concern I have in that this government could be urban versus rural. I think we're already beginning to see some of that. And I think, you know, the difficulty they're going to have is that they now have quite a lot of rural MPs. So we'll see how quickly that group get together and start doing some influencing. Reintroduction of housing number targets, right, but what? Based on what? Are we going back to 2014 again, or are we based it on figures which are much more realistic now? So we don't know what that is, and we don't know what the enforcement of it's going to be, or how it's going to come about, or whether the local council has to abide by it, or whether it's a minimum or a maximum. We don't know. There's not enough detail. There's nothing there. Remove the planning barriers for data centres. Now, this is very dangerous. I don't know whether you know what a data centre is, but every time you save an email, you're pushing it into a centre which actually stores it. Now, these centres, there's 2 of them in the Greenbelt, already looks as if we're going to lose that, having the inspectors at both of those planning inquiries checked them out. But it looks as if they're going to do this. You need to know that those centres require a great deal of electricity. They are very hot, and they therefore have to be cooled down by water. And nobody's considering that whatsoever. And here we are at a stage where we could be facing droughts in the future, and we could be facing heat, extra heat, and we could be needing all the electricity we've got without putting into data centres. So I urge you, when you look at the email, is it really worth saving, or can you check it out? Release Greybelt. Poor performing Greenbelt. I don't know what that is, because Greenbelt isn't poor performing. It's got a role. It's stopping urban sprawl. That's what it's there for. So what is the definition of poor performing Greenbelt? The Prime Minister mentioned 2 places, his wretched car park at Wolverhampton and the garage at Tottenham Vale. That garage has been put forward for the last 15 years. I'm very surprised somebody hasn't built on it. But nothing else. So I don't know what he means by poor grey belt. So we'll be very interested to see what that answer is. Review of Greenbelt boundaries. That's come up. Again, what is that going to be based on? How's it going to take place? Affordable housing. Now, there we're with them 100%. The crisis in this country is not housing. We haven't got a dearth of 5-bedroom and 4-bedroom houses. We've got a dearth of affordable houses for youngsters and that sort of thing. And so far, affordable housing hasn't shown up. Now, let me give you an example of what's happened. At Gilston in East Hertfordshire, they got planning permission for 10,000 homes in the Greenbelt, on condition that 40% of them, 4,000 of them, were affordable. Guess what? A year later, back come the developers. Oh, awfully sorry, we're not making the profit we thought we were going to make on this, so we're going to cut back the affordable houses by 1,700. That's 1,700 young families and young people who aren't going to get a house as a result of that. That's called the variation agreement, and that should stop tomorrow, because there's no need for it. And that has been happening throughout. If you look at most Greenbelt developments, they're 4- and 5-bedroom homes, and sometimes a density of only 14 homes per hectare. Onshore wind farms, don't know what we're going to see there. But do remember, we've got wind turbines now over 100 feet high. They're enormous. And they also make a bit of noise. Solar farms. That's again a worry. I understand that already Milburn has decided that 3 major solar farms, absolutely enormous ones, which have not necessarily gone through the planning process, are going to now be allowed. How we can allow our agricultural land to be taken up like this, I don't know. It's a major effect on food security, and on that food security side, this autumn we are going to have a food crisis because they weren't able to plant in the time because of the rain. So you're going to find food prices will be going up. And we're also facing a revised national planning policy framework. And as soon as we've seen that, we will be running as an organisation a seminar for our members to bring them up to date with what we've found there and what we see happening in the future. The economic value of the Green Belt. Now this is something I just don't understand. The government policy appears to suggest that the countryside has no value until it's concreted over. And I really don't understand that, because the health and welfare side, we had a wonderful talk from a chap called Professor Pretty at Essex University, who reckoned that on health and welfare alone, the NHS could serve 20 billion a year by getting people out into the Greenbelt. He produced figures which showed that 50% of Londoners suffer from stress. And yet if they could get out into the countryside for an hour, they'd be a lot better. And our report, A Positive Vision for London's Greenbelt, covers this in there. And again, air quality. We've had a young girl for the first time killed by pollution in London. Now, how many more of that got to happen before we sort that out? Pollution's got to have somewhere to go to. You've got relief from heat. That's becoming more and more prevalent. Being able to, the heat from the centre of London getting out into the countryside. Access to nature and, of course, recreation. And then, of course, the important role of carbon sequestration. What's the value of that? That must be a tremendous value of the countryside. Nature regeneration, flood prevention. Without the green belt being able to absorb the water, London would get flooded much more frequently, probably worse than it is at the moment. Food security, and it's local food security. You know, round here you've got a farm shop or something like that. You know it's been grown round here and everything else. That's very important, and this is what the green belt provides London with. And regeneration, and that means the urban areas regenerating the areas that need to be regenerated so that more people can live there and more people can spend their lives there. So that's my presentation. I'm awfully sorry if I've kept you longer than I should have done, and I apologise for that. And we've now got questions, but thank you very much indeed for listening. I think there's one there. We've got the mic. It's on your other side. That's it.
Oh. Yeah, just while we've got you here with your experience, you mentioned working with our MP Tom. Is it a disadvantage for us because he doesn't cover the Sevenoaks District Council?
Not at all. His constituency covers your area, and therefore he's the one you should be lobbying. You know, unfortunately, the new boundaries don't make any sense anyway. But no, he'd be the person you need to speak to.
But he doesn't cover Sevenoaks District Council.
Doesn't matter. He covers two different district councils, and that's not uncommon. I think there are even some MPs that cover something like 3 or 4 district councils, and they have to deal with all of them.
Okay, but he's not the MP for Sevenoaks? No.
No, he's not. But that doesn't matter. Sevenoaks district goes into his constituency, so he would be the person you need to talk to.
Okay, all right.
Sorry, Phil, will you make a response to that?
Good evening, I'm Roddy Hogarth. I'm leader of the District Council in Sevenoaks. And I can tell you, after July 4th, one of the first calls I received was from Tom Tugendhat, and the subject he raised was concern about the Green Belt and the actions we're taking in the local plan. So he is on your case.
And can I say, in the past, when I'd met him twice, briefing him about the Green Belt, either in Parliament or down locally, he listens very carefully. So I found him empathetic to what we're trying to do.
First of all, thank you very much for a very, very informative presentation, actually. I think a lot of that was certainly new to me, and I suspect for many of the audience here. So that's very, very helpful. A quick question on what happens when we say no? So I think you mentioned quite clearly that the council has the power to override, if that's the right word, any inspector's recommendations, which sounds great. What happens then? Where does that escalate, if indeed it does escalate?
Well, it
Thanks.
hasn't happened yet, but it's, as I say, a recommendation. I mean, the trouble is with the MPPF, it changes every 6 months. So trying to keep up to date with it and what's going on. And, you know, I do have a lot of sympathy for local councillors because, you know, they've got to spend almost all their time trying to keep up with planning law, and then PPGs, which are put out by the civil servants as the interpretation of those, which is sometimes very one-sided. If the council decided that it wasn't going to accept the recommendation of the inspector, it would have to give very good reasons as to why it wasn't going to accept it, and it would then go probably to the Secretary of State. But he would then probably have to call in the various parties and talk to them and discuss how they were going to take it forward. You will often hear from council officers, planning officers, that if you don't do this, you'll be overruled by the department and they'll tell you what to do. The department can't cope with it. They're not big enough. There's a shortage of planning officers for a start, and there's a shortage of planning people in the department. And wherever these threats have been put forward before, they've actually not transpired. They've just been allowed to disappear. I think there's only 2 that resulted in any action, and that wasn't really very effective. So just be wary of this, oh gosh, if you don't do as we tell you to as planning officers, then this is what we're going to, this is what will happen. So there's a chap at the back.
Hello, thank you for giving a very interesting speech there. I'd like to, first of all, thank you, Roddy, for coming down. I am one of the local councillors here from Edenbridge. I'm in the north, and I'm the Liberal Democrat one. And although we're different parties, it's very pleasing to see that the chairman has come down to listen to the concerns of the people in Edenbridge. So thank you very much, Roddy, for doing that. I will also make a point about there's a large number of new councillors who came in last time in the election, and we were all presented with the Plan 2040 by the previous regime, both led by the leader before Roddy, so Roddy has now basically got a fresh slate, I would say, to address what's the plan from what's that's going forward. We were presented with decisions based on a developer-driven consultation, which I don't believe was a consultation by any stretch of the imagination, certainly for Edenbridge, when we were presented with a fait accompli. The councillors really had no position to stand back and listen to what people were saying, and I'm certainly listening to what people are saying tonight, and it very much ties in with my sort of views as well around what we should be doing going forward. But certainly that I have to sort of keep a fairly neutral view, because obviously when we come to make decisions on the vote I make, I must make them sort of on an objective basis rather than any sort of personal feelings or personal emotions I might have, because I am directly involved where I live by one of the changes, because it's going to be right next to where my house. So therefore I must say that declare my own measure of self-interest at this point in time. But I certainly think that there is a strong argument, a very, very strong argument for maintaining the Greenbelt here. We live in a very nice community that's been eroded over the years with fly developments we can't control, and that has impacted very strongly on the Edenbridge and its character. Now, that we do need more houses, and there are some aspects of this plan which are very good, like the changes to the centre of the town, and possibly also the Four Elms development, opening up some more access for handicapped people into the railway station, which at the moment, if you're handicapped, you can't go out to London by train because it's not possible with the 2 stations we've got. The big weakness in this plan, therefore, as much as apart from the Greenbelt, is its complete and utter lack of infrastructure in it. Something I've raised, something others have raised. We have no roads that can cope with the volume of traffic that might be coming along. I think the medical centre may just be able to cope with the extension for the new number of people coming in. The schools, it's not just a secondary school we need. If you think of the number of young children, because these are going to be families coming in, primary schools can't cope at the moment with the volumes that are going on around here. There's no, if you look around all the country schools and the Edenbridge school, it's beer bust bursting at the seams. So we need at least one more primary school alone, maybe two. We certainly need more dentists, and we certainly need better roads, let alone the potholes. The roads are B and C roads. To take that volume of traffic that's going to be proposed around here will be a nightmare. We need a massive, massive amount of investment to come down to improve the infrastructure around Edenbridge. So I'm hoping that when the Regulation 19 comes out, all these factors, which I know have been raised by numbers of different people, will be taken into account, and it will look wholly different from what it was before Regulation 18. But I don't hold my breath, because the driving force behind this is basically the planning departments in the council. And although as members we will seek to influence, we will make a final decision, we are dependent on what they give us and what they present to us. And it's down to them, not the inspectors, it's down to the individual councillors and down to the planning department. So I would argue very strongly, yeah, keep lobbying me, keep lobbying all your local councillors. There are other in here, and keep writing to Sevenoaks. Keep the pressure on, and I support NEDRA in all it's trying to do, in trying to speak and provide a voice for the people in Edenbridge. Thank you very much.
Can I just say that one of the major problems that we've got is that there is something like between 600,000 and 1 million planning permissions out there that the developers aren't building. And you know, if they're allowed to get away with this all the time, you also find, especially on the urban fringe of the Greenbelt, where it's nearest the built-up area of London, you also find that developers are taking out options and buying the land and deliberately allowing it to go scruffy so they can call it grey belt. They're being allowed to do. I was promised by the department that in the LURA Act, the Levelling Up and I forget what it is now. That one, they were regeneration. They were going to put in a requirement that these had to be registered at the land registry, all these options. But when the back came out, it had disappeared. And the problem is the developers have a massive lobby. They're making fantastic profits, and they can pour this money in there. After all, remember, one of the developers, about 4 or 5 years ago, I think, his Christmas bonus was 110 million. And you know, this is land banking. You see this happening, and they deliberately do this because they know the land will go up in value. Until we actually challenge that and take on that as a problem, it's going to continue. There's a person there, and then one there. Who's got the microphone?
I have. Can you hear me?
Who's got the microphone?
Was that yes?
Oh, sorry, right, the back, yes.
Right. Okay, I was involved with the original Residents Association, so these bring back some memories for me. And I have to say, we got to the stage that we did not trust Sevenoaks District Council. They were very nice to us when we agreed with them. If we disagreed with them, they dismissed us as a small marginal group. I think one of the classic ones was when an inspector came along and there was Greenbelt land and a developer was after it. Sevenoaks District Council were more or less neutral. The inspector said, I can see there is no need for these houses, but we've got a developer who will build a relief road and Sevenoaks District Council can't afford it. Well, we've got a relief road, and guess who paid for it? Can you think of somewhere beginning with S? Well, I actually phoned them up and said, why is that? They said, well, it was never a legally binding agreement, and therefore that's why they paid for it. So for those in favour of relief road, fine, but a bit of duplicity again from Sevenoaks District Council. So I hope, and I know at least one of the district councils, I hope they can be trusted these days, because that's what we need.
You've got that?
Thank you.
Yes. Sorry, I remember that. Mine's actually a really more a question about the environmental impact, because is there in the local plan any way we can pressure for carbon neutral or neutral housing? Because I believe there was proposed that new housing had to be, to a certain extent, neutral, as they call it, so that the impact on the environment and on our infrastructure was lowered. Now, that was mooted about 6 months ago, a year ago. It was in the local media. Tunbridge Wells Amplify, which I'm a member of, which is an environmental lobby group for people, suppliers, they're looking into this. Is there any way that we can, is that anywhere in the law for Greenbelt that is part of it, or is that something that's not considered at all?
Well, first of all, up until 2010, that was a requirement. And then the government decided to drop it under pressure from the developers.
Oh, I wonder why.
Because the developers didn't want to put that in. You can do what you like in putting it in the local plan, but that won't necessarily stop a developer appealing against it. That's the problem. And I have great sympathy for districts, councils, when they face this sort of thing from developers, because developers can chuck millions of pounds at it, whereas the council's got limited resources.
Very recently, in our golf course, where a developer blatantly lied to all of us and said, oh yes, we're definitely going to build a home for people, and we're going to sacrifice a couple of holes, but it's going to be the most wonderful golf club, and if you pass it now, it's derelict. It's heartbreaking, actually. It's heartbreaking, and we lost a really loved resource to lying developers. So there's a lot of bitterness in here, as you can hear, because this has been going on for 20, 30, 40, as long as I've been alive, it's been going on. But thank you for answering that specific question. I'm sorry. Thank you.
Sorry, there was a lady down here.
The gentleman said at the back of the hall, I think it was, about the volume of traffic. Now, I live on the Four Elms Road, and that traffic is atrocious up that road, and we do need a crossing to get across to the doctors for people that are walking. I've spoken to Edenbridge warden. He doesn't want to know. I've spoken to Sevenoaks when they were down on my estate. They don't want to know, and it's past the buck all the time. So who is it to do with, please?
The zebra crossing.
Yeah.
It goes through the district council, but it's a highways decision on it. And if the highways don't think there's a need for it,
Well, are they waiting for an accident to happen?
I was about to say, I think after the second death they might do something about it.
Sorry, you should just keep. We do have information on that if you want to.
Hello. So, in answer to your question, I believe. Hi. In answer to your question, I believe that is in the provision proposal. So, I said there were a couple of good things in there. I believe that's in there. So, well, hopefully they're going to, hopefully they're going to do it. I think they said they're going to do that, and nobody will get run over.
Can I just tell you, there's an organisation called TRIX, which works out traffic flow. And generally speaking, market housing creates 4 traffic movements a day. So if you have 500 market houses, that's 2,000 extra movements a day you're going to get. And, this does need to be considered because pollution is a dire problem, really is. Air quality should always be considered in any of these applications. Sorry, is one back there?
Turn this on? No.
Oh, one here, and then you're afterwards.
So, can I speak?
Yes.
All the ways of going about this are very civilised, you've suggested, writing and lobbying councillors and so on. But, I mean, should we be putting notices up, no housing, or should we be creating demonstration marches? Should we be doing some things on the sort of edge of the law just to make it quite clear that we're not just a pushover? Because some of this very nice suggestions strike me that we're dealing with some very unpleasant people. And I don't think they're going to care very much. I think they're going to just sit it out and hope that we just write our letters, do our nice things, and they still get their way.
Well, in answer to your question, I can't possibly answer that because I'm a retired magistrate. With regards to lobbying, I have found, and MPs have told me this themselves, it's much more effective you turning up at their surgery, and they do appreciate when you're slightly mob-handed. So if it's not just you, it's 4 or 5 of you going to a surgery. That's the most effective way of getting there. If you write a letter to an MP, it's quite likely to go to one of his team, and he may never see it. So that's why, and MPs have told me this, surgeries are very important. And by the way, there is a debate on Friday about planning and the King's Speech, and our president, who is Gareth Bacon, who's the MP for Orpington, will be speaking in it.
There's the lady in the green top.
Yes.
Thank you. One observation, the leaflet that came through the door was absolutely fantastic. It made me come here, and I'm really pleased that you've got me involved. The neighbours that I asked about, are you going to the meeting? Both of them said, I was going to, but. So that's, you know, so I think what you did was fantastic, and just keep us all involved, because there's a lot more people, as you know, than are in this room who would get involved in this. So that was fantastic. My question is, I'm wondering about the quality of the assessment in relation to the impact on flooding. And I say that as somebody who lives down Church Street with a really short garden and this really sweet little stream that goes down the end of the garden until come November. And if you don't know the area and you're driving back towards, depends which way you go, but if you go over the little bridge on your way out, look to your left, and that lovely field becomes a lake, you do know. And I will happily send a video of that to anybody who isn't aware of just how serious the flooding is. And I believe that where we are is quite connected to the bit of water that will be around that area. And I've only been there 2 years, and my lovely neighbour, whenever I see this water, and he looks at me and he says, it's okay, calm down. When we had the big flood, it did get to there, but you see that house over there, it's never going to go higher. And he explains to me how it's not going to get, because it does go halfway up the garden, which is very short, remember. So he explains to me why I'm not going to get flooded. I am absolutely convinced that the sort of things that the water company was saying are not going to really cut it in terms of the impact that that is going to have around. And just the added complication is that when our river goes up and down within a day, I understand it's something to do with Tunbridge. So it's not just us that is affected by possible flooding in relation to this. So it's just a big question mark about the effectiveness of that assessment for flooding.
Well, it's an important factor. At the moment in Hampshire, there is no building going on there at all because of what's called nutrient neutrality, which basically means that if they build any more houses, then more sewage will go into those wonderful chalk streams in Hampshire and that sort of thing. So, this is organised, or should be organised, by the Environment Agency, and they should not be allowed to build in floodplains. And I think if you've got a floodplain and it looks as if builders are looking at it and that sort of thing, then you need to get the Environment Agency onto it straight away on the basis that, why build a house where they know it's going to be flooded? That's ridiculous. With regard to your statement about it'll never get that far, I would say to you, not yet.
Good afternoon. Fantastic presentation, and thank you very much for coming supporting Edenbridge. I've got a business in the middle of the town, and it's not just about me, but I think it's an impact on the people who live and visit Edenbridge. There's a property which is, again, 20 yards from my shop, and I've been there for nearly 27 years, and it's been an eyesore. Over a period of time, people have moved out. There's one person left in this building now who's running a business on a week-by-week basis, and I think there's the person who runs the business, he's a tenant upstairs. It's an eyesore. When people come to visit Edenbridge, you know, we're trying to make the high street as interesting and as we can. It's a leading question. Is there a way there where a landlord has neglected his building, and because of where it's situated, it's a fantastic asset, having a big area in the middle of Edenbridge, but he's doing nothing to it. Nothing's being contributed to the town at all. Is there a way there can be a compulsory purchase, or something could be done, because that area needs to be developed in some way? It's deteriorating because nothing is happening.
There's two aspects I'd say there. First of all, yes, there are actions that can be taken by the district council on enforcement, but most district councils have dire problems over enforcement officers because they just don't have them. They don't have the money for it anymore, and enforcement is part of it. I don't know whether it's bad enough for any enforcement, but yes, they can do enforcement and say that you need to repair that building. It could be all sorts of reasons why it's not there. On compulsory purchase, the new government have said they're going to make it easier for district councils to be able to take compulsory purchase. At the moment, they have to get permission from the minister, I think, and I think what is intended is that the local district will be able to make that decision themselves. It's necessary because otherwise we won't get hold of this brownfield, the land we desperately need in urban areas, if we can't get hold of it and the owner of it's not prepared to let it go. So you could see changes in that, but what they are and the detail of them, I'm afraid I can't tell you because I haven't seen it yet.
There's a lady just at the front, Phil.
Yes, I had a look at the hierarchy assessment for deciding on whether Edenbridge should be considered for development. And I was a little bit concerned to see that Sevenoaks had decided that we had almost the right assessment points as Sevenoaks has, its town, for rail links. And I was thinking if that was actually true, then our houses would be worth double what they are at the moment. So, you know, some of the assessments, I couldn't really look at the assessment for traffic because a lot of the assumptions weren't visible for us to see. And I felt that we had several options to choose, all of which seemed to include Edenbridge being well developed. We didn't have, case. There was one where you could say, like I did, none of the above, because I don't feel we're a sustainable site, and we've got the most development of greenbelt land in comparison to all the other sites. And I don't know how to get that across to Sevenoaks, because I feel we're in a minority on the council, Edenbridge. So I don't know how we get that point, like you say, if you can persuade the councillors to defend your greenbelt, I don't know how we're going to do that, because if the other people in Sevenoaks won't help us, then we're...
Well, two points on that. The leader of the council is here tonight, and I want to thank him very much indeed for coming, because it's not often you get leaders coming to these sort of meetings, and it's very nice to have them there. And also, and I think you've already made your point. It's probably been noted, and that can't do any harm. So, well done.
Thank you again. In addition to the local plan, I'm particularly concerned about the proposals about Gatwick Airport. Edenbridge is going to be one of the towns that will be affected by any plans to amend the flight path for the Northern Runway project. So I'd quite like to see more on NEDRA's agenda about that in the future. But particularly linked to this plan, is there any way that we can make a case that kind of links the two in terms of the environmental impact it will have on Edenbridge if we've got more development and less sustainability in terms of our local environment? That was my question. Thank you.
The answer is yes, you could use it, but it won't be nearly as strong as the other points you're making, because there's still nothing definite about that runway. I mean, when it's there, that's different. But at the moment, who knows? It may never go ahead, so we don't know. And so you've got many stronger points to make, I think, as a result of what I've heard tonight.
Thank you.
Do we actually have a good assessment of how many people are wanting homes in Edenbridge, local people, that is? Because it seems to me that when they put in these big developments, about 90% of the people who move in aren't local, and that local people, particularly youngsters, can never find anywhere to rent or to buy within their price range. So who are we providing these houses for? I would suggest that most of the people that move here, or have moved here, as I've noticed in the past few years, have actually not used Edenbridge for shopping. They've not used Edenbridge for its schools. They've not used working in Edenbridge. They get in their cars and they charge off to the nearest station, probably Oxted or Sevenoaks, and they go to London or somewhere else. They're not actually participating in the town. And where our councillor mentioned that Edenbridge has deteriorated, I 100% agree, because that community spirit, which bound us all together in difficult times, has actually partly been lost. The people are still good people, but it's very difficult for them to relate when half of the town is becoming a dormitory.
Well, I was, on that one, as far as Elmbridge is concerned, that local plan there, they looked at the figures under the standard method and they said these are over-exaggerating the numbers we need, and they reduced them. That's going through the process. We'll see how well they get on with it, as a result of which they were able to save their green belt. With regards to people getting involved, I'm afraid it's a generational thing. I suspect you and I are a similar generation, and we were brought up to serve the community. This was all part of it. We were asked to do. Youngsters don't necessarily do that now. They like to come home, watch the television. It's the football on. That's it. You won't see anybody. And I think it's just a fact of life. Now, how we get them involved, I don't know. I do know that if you start talking at the younger generation, that the pendulum seems to be swinging back. So perhaps those are the ones we need to contact, but that we have to reach over the generation in between in order to get that to happen. That's not a London Greenbelt policy, I have to say.
All right. Firstly, thank you to NEDRA. I think they've done absolutely fantastic work this year. It's been a very short period of time, and I can definitely see we're seeing this packed hall here, so definitely the community is coming together. And thank you for being here on behalf of London Greenbelt Council, and a lot of great insights here. One of the things you mentioned was that, ultimately it's down to the councillors to decide, and the inspector doesn't have much say over that. Now I live in one of the forum site was discussed here, and I'm a neighbor there. It's a very strange thing, because when my house was built, the S106 said that a lot of Kent County Council land will be protected in perpetuity, and that's the word that's still there. It's still on the Sevenoaks District Council planning portal. And because there were great deal of great crested newts, there will be a nature conservation area that will be built and protected in perpetuity. So the nature conservation area was built as per the plans, and if you look at the satellite view, you can actually see that it's exactly as per planned. And then you have a developer who comes along and says, you know what, we are going to build you a secondary school and we are going to build over this. And they piggyback on a ARUP report that said 3% of the land is poorly performing. And then the councillor, the development officer says, planning officer says, the land is poorly performing. No, first of all, there is no such concept as poorly performing, as you said. And then the planning office obviously uses that to justify it. They say we'll build a school. They had brought it in the previous local plan that was squashed at the regulation 19 stage. They decided not to wait for the next local plan, and they brought it outside of the local plan. They got permission for 300 homes. And on the provision, who is the planning agent side, they said, well, you know what, we got the permission and we said we'll build the Sevenoaks, we'll build a secondary school. However, we'll build the secondary school will only come and the land will only be given to Kent County Council once 70% of the homes are developed, which will be 2031. So that's what the 300 homes were approved for, 2031. And now they are saying, well, if you want the land earlier, let us build another 103 homes. And actually, let's build all homes, and maybe we'll give you the land earlier. But still, there's no guarantee that the secondary school will ever be built. So we just want the land. We'll give you the land earlier. Now, because we initially got it around to 2031, maybe we'll give you the land in 2027. But let us build. So the frustration here is that, does the word in perpetuity mean anything? Or does it just mean that the planning officers and the councillors can decide that perpetuity means 10 years, because clearly that's all that they in fact, less than 10 years. The second point is that I actually went and spoke against it. I was given a grand total of 3 minutes and 1 slide, 1 diagram to present. So as a member of public who wanted to speak against the kind of development, all I got was 3 minutes and 1 slide. That's it. And that too, that's it. And then there were questions asked, not of me, but more of the developer. And then obviously it was kind of rubber stamped. And now we realize that it was rubber stamped to give the land in 2031. And now it will go back to the council and they'll say, oh, we are going to give you the land earlier for a school, which may or may not be built, but that's not our problem. So my frustration here is that we are basically just dependent on these planning officers and councillors. There is no way to appeal. And there's no way to even challenge perpetuity, because clearly perpetuity here was just 10 years. And it's very frustrating because we know what's going on. We've seen the evidence. We can see a nature conservation area which the developer wants to build a road over and actually just make it a grassland. We know it's not right, but there's nothing we can do. And it's really sad, and I speak on behalf, I'm sure, of a lot of people, that it's very frustrating that the public does not really get a right to talk more than 3 minutes, does not get a right to represent us. And it's great that we have NEDRA now, because hopefully the council will listen to NEDRA more than they listen to a single person. But yeah, my main question here was, does perpetuity and all really mean anything, or they can just override any section 106 as they want? Thank you.
With regard to any development put forward by a developer, if they talk about infrastructure like that, or a doctor's surgery, as some of them do, or a home for the elderly, that sort of thing, it's very rare for those to go ahead. And the reason being is because they come back on the variation agreement, which I mentioned to you earlier, and they say, oh, sorry, we can't make the profit from this we should do, so we're not going to do that. And unfortunately, district councils do have the power to do that, but the problem with that is that it costs a fortune, and the developers have got all this money and are able to do it, and local district councils can't do it. And the other thing, which is very frustrating, is that if they don't get permission, they can appeal. But if they do get permission, we can't appeal. Now, why is that? That's totally wrong. There should be a right of appeal to local people against a decision made by an inspector if they don't think it's right, or by the council if they don't think it's right. There should be an opportunity for this. But one of the things I would say in defence of district councils is because of the pressure they're under financially, they cannot afford to fight half these cases, whereas the developers are making these massive profits. And, you know, to employ a QC and all the rest of it, which costs a fortune, is nothing to them. And this is the trouble. And what's more, they can go back soon after and put in a different application, which is slightly different, and say, oh, well, we'll have this one instead, and so on. And the council has to deal with that. And again, if it goes to appeal, they've got all the expense of doing that. So if you like, the power is mainly in the developer. And it's something I think all of us ought to be making a fuss about and stopping it.
We're probably about running out of time. Thank you. Yeah,
right.
thank you.
Not sure.
Well, thank you very much to Richard Knox-Johnston for a very informative talk. It's been very helpful.
Can I just remind you to fill in this form and put the cheque for it? And I'll leave you with a chuckle of a story which in my ward in Bromley, a developer came up with an idea of building a village in my Greenbelt. Remember, this is Charles Darwin's houses there, and he put forward a plan for houses, a school, a pub, and a church. And we thought, oh, yes, we've heard of all this beforehand. Anyway, we managed to fight him off at the appeal. And then the locals came to me and said, what can we do? Because he's deliberately allowing this land to go derelict. And I said, tongue-in-cheek, wait until after midnight and go in there and plant oak trees all over it. And when it's big enough, apply for a tree preservation order. 23 years later, I'm having lunch with my sister, who lives nearby. There's a knock on the door, and it's two of these residents who said, tell Richard we've just got our tree preservation order.
Well, thank you everybody for coming tonight and for sharing your comments and thoughts. There is, as I say, a box at the back for more feedback. Please do leave those thoughts because it helps us to be able to understand what we as a community are, what's important to us and what we need to be campaigning for. So thank you. There are going to be refreshments for tea and coffee for people if they would like to stay afterwards just to network and chat. So thank you very much indeed. So thank you.